Is one in a series. For more information and to order PBS home video, call 1-800-776-8300.
The following presentation is from PBS Home Video.
In the days of the buffalo, the great northern plains were the hunting grounds of my people. To most Americans, we're known as the Sioux. Our own name is Lakota. Our territory included much of what is now North and South Dakota, northern Nebraska, and eastern Wyoming. In Lakota, my name is Omakatanka. It means great wide world. The white man, he calls me Milo Yellowhair. At the center of our lands, there is a sacred place. We call it Chesapa, the Black Hills, the heart of everything that is. It was here that my ancestors came to pray. When the white man came here, he found gold, and he stole the Black Hills. The U.S. government outlawed the Lakota religion. For more than 100 years, we have fought for the return of this sacred place. It has been a struggle with the white man, and a struggle with ourselves. To most Americans, the Black Hills of South Dakota are best known for a big rock carving. During the summer months, 20,000 people a day visit Mount Rushmore. This huge sculpture, blasted out of native rock, is called the Shrine of Democracy. Here, visitors have an opportunity to reflect on the values that shaped American history. With the attraction of Mount Rushmore, tourism dominates the economy of the Black Hills, bringing over $100 million a year to white-owned businesses. Few Indians have managed to adapt to the new conditions. In this America, the Indian is just a relic.
Thank you very much.
Have the history. You know, the history of America is the Indians. And that's what tourists come to see, and it's nice to have them out here. Still the same, making the same things that they did 100 years ago. It's nice. They like them when they're in the suede and the leather. They like them with all the beads on. They like them with the braids. They like to buy the traditional look of what they've always thought the Indian was.
Say how. How. Huh. Say, how's the engine?
How's the Indian?
"60 miles away, east of the Black Hills, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation begins. It was here, in the Badlands, that my people were rounded up 100 years ago and forced onto lands that the white man had no use for. This is my home, the home of the Ogallala, one of the 7 bands of the Lakota Nation. As you cross onto the reservation, you feel a change, a different sense of time. My people did not adapt well to the white man's world. Far from the tourists in the Black Hills, Indian reality begins. The Ogallalas are the descendants of the great warriors, Red Cloud and Crazy Horse.
There you go. There you go.
My feeling is that Oglala still continue to remind the United States that there's a people inside the exterior boundaries of the United States that are not like them. I recall that some of the books as recent as 10 years ago, and even now, depict the Indians as poor, poverty-stricken, helpless victims of progress. Okay, that might be true for the people who look at us that way, but for many of us, to live in the state is by choice. Choice primarily initiated and driven by the love for the land. Regardless of how the land is now, we feel, at least the traditional Lakotas feel, that we all come from the land.
The origin legend of any people gives you the underpinnings for the social fabric of that people, for everything good in that society, and also all of the corruptions in any society. Among the Lakota, our origin legend we call the Othokahe stories. In our story, it starts out, at the time of first motion, Iyan is. Before anything has meaning, Iyan is. The spirit of Iyan is Wakantanka. And so Iyan takes from the core of Iyan's self and sends it to the surface. And we call this place Wamanka Ogananka Ichante, the heart of everything that is. This is the Black Hills. The Black Hills are one of the oldest places on the face of the earth. They're 6 billion years old. There's always, from the creation of Earth, that place was special. We also say that we were created and we spread out from the Black Hills. We came back to the Black Hills during the cleansing, and then we scattered again from there. Our pipe was brought to us in the Black Hills, the sacred pipe. The 7 sacred ceremonies of the pipe were given to the people in the Black Hills. The 7 nations gathered at the Black Hills every 7 years. So there's a whole, I guess, thousands of years of relationship to the Black Hills. That this is all of the earth is sacred. This place is the most special place on earth.
It was so sacred no one lived in there on a permanent basis. It was only a place you could go in and go out of, like the Holy of Holies for the Hebrews. They had a responsibility from the very beginning of creation to act in a certain way to the buffalo and to the coyote and the snake and other animals. In the ceremonies, you can assume the form of those animals. And when you do, you have to contribute something to their knowledge of the universe, and they contribute something to yours. Those are real ceremonies, and these things really take place. So when you say the land is sacred, what you're talking about is a particular geography that involves all kinds of people and animals, which is a little different than having an ancestral estate in France and being able to trace back to Charlemagne. Now that's a very valid thing, but it doesn't involve all of creation. See, in the Indian perception involves duties and responsibilities. Now, if you're taken off that land and you can't fulfill those responsibilities, then the rest of creation starts to become alienated because you're not doing your part. And you see, then you begin to get in severe trouble. And if you talk to some of the holy men up there, they will say that a lot of the social problems of the Sioux are a result of losing the Black Hills, so you couldn't perform your duties. You couldn't become a contributor to the ongoing creation. And consequently, your people started to fall away, and they started to suffer, and they started to fight among themselves.
The troubles of my people began with the loss of the buffalo. The buffalo provided my great-grandparents with their food, their clothing, and their shelter. But in the 1860s, white immigrants traveling west on what we call the Thieves' Road began to slaughter the buffalo. Hostilities between the Indians and whites grew. Led by Chief Red Cloud, the Lakotas went to war. They pushed back the Long Knives and forced the U.S. government to negotiate a peace treaty. The Treaty of Fort Laramie, signed in 1868, set aside the Black Hills and all of western South Dakota for the exclusive use of the Sioux. White men were forbidden to enter. But the buffalo were disappearing, so Red Cloud and his band settled near the fort, tempted by the government's offer of free food, liquor, and tools. But a young warrior named Crazy Horse never signed the treaty. He and his followers remained on the Lakota hunting grounds and refused to join Red Cloud at the fort. The split between Red Cloud and Crazy Horse, between the hang-around-the-fort Indians and the traditionalists, the so-called hostiles, would drive a wedge between the Lakota people that would last more than a century. But after the treaty, prospectors found gold in the Black Hills. In 1874, General George Armstrong Custer led an illegal army expedition through the Sioux lands to confirm the discovery. He returned with tales of nuggets just waiting to be picked from the ground. After the discovery of gold, the U.S. government pressured the Sioux to change the treaty and sell the Black Hills. But Crazy Horse refused to even consider negotiations. He declared, "One does not sell the land on which the people walk." In 1876, General Custer attacked Crazy Horse's encampment on the banks of the Little Bighorn. In a shocking defeat, the Sioux annihilated Custer's full command. My own great-grandfather, Tulance, rode with Crazy Horse that day. But a year later, under pressure from the army and with the buffalo nearly extinct, Crazy Horse and his starving band finally surrendered. A few months later, he was killed by white soldiers and the newly created Indian Police. Despite his importance, no photograph of Crazy Horse was ever taken, and his burial site remains a secret even today. In 1889, Congress annexed the Black Hills. Thousands of fortune seekers poured into the sacred land of the Sioux. The vast Lakota territories shrank down to a few small reservations. Today, the Pine Ridge Reservation is the poorest place in the United States. It is a land with no visible industry or businesses. In an economy where land has no spiritual value, but is only equal to money, The 20,000 Lakota who live here have not done well. Unemployment on the reservation is over 80%, and welfare is the main source of income. A single person receives $32 every 2 weeks.
There isn't any jobs. That's the main problem we have on the reservation, is there's no jobs. And if there is a job, a place that where a lot of people could be employed, I don't think a lot of the families wouldn't be drawing ADC or getting general assistance. But since a lot of stuff closed down on the reservation, everybody's been drawing food stamps and commodities.
The village of Pine Ridge is the seat of local government. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is the source of federal money and is by far the largest employer on the reservation. The majority who live here are of mixed Indian and white blood. In the old days, Indian agents responsible for the equal distribution of rations didn't care who got them, and Indians who lived close by, the ones called hanger-on-the-forts, got more than their share. In many ways, the situation remains the same today. The town of Pine Ridge and its political hierarchy received the lion's share of federal aid. And Oglalas who live in the remote districts of the reservation get less.
If you go in a BIA office or a tribal building, you won't see any full blood sitting in there. You'll be seeing full bloods, half-breeds, and Washitas. They're all in there. They're taking over everything.
What's the matter with the mixed bloods?
One day they'll be Indian, next day they'll be white.
Yeah.
One day,
against you.
yeah, they'll turn. One day they'll be good. One day they'll turn the other. Yeah.
And then there's a lot of these full bloods that do have. They're well educated, but nowadays, like Vern said, you can't go in any office and apply for a job on this reservation unless you have green or blue eyes, and if you're light-skinned.
The tribe is caught between the desperation of unemployment and the breakdown of the culture. The level of hopelessness can be measured by the high rate of alcoholism. The sale and consumption of alcohol are outlawed on the reservation, but a good part of the federal aid dollars end up in border towns, boosting the local economy with the liquor trade. Many have fallen with a bottle in their hand.
You see a lot of these houses where all they've got is a mattress on the floor and a bedroom with some blankets, maybe an old table with a couple of broken chairs, some commodities in the cupboard, very little food in the refrigerator. You see a lot of child neglect. You see a lot of drunken people. You see a lot of people waiting for each other to pass out so that they can rip each other off, this sort of thing. You see a lot of beatings, all that drunkenness seems to bring. I guess some people think they're having a good time, but if you're not drunk yourself, it looks like you walk through the gates of hell or something in some areas.
A lot of things that are with me today, in my memories, about attempts to escape from the reality of what was going on, the drunkenness. And we see a lot of Indian people who are drunk. They may be the only warriors who are saying that they don't want to accept anything anymore, one more day of white society, and that they would just soon kill themselves drinking. Slow death. I've thought many times and along those lines, because I myself went through it, and I didn't want to accept one more day of living in a society that was crushing and devastating and murdering the culture of our people and the spirituality.
In the 1950s, the Eisenhower administration tried a new solution to the problems on the reservation. It was called termination. The government pressured Indians to leave the reservation and move to the city.
When they get to the city, they expect, and they've heard rumors of $5, $6, $7 an hour jobs, nice apartments, running water, bathrooms, showers, and they expect to find this.
Well, what these new urban Indians usually found were ghettos, minimum wage jobs, unemployment, poverty, and despair.
The man of the family can't cope with these problems, as I say. He's never been faced with them on a reservation. On a reservation, at least he could always go out and kill a deer or go out and hunt or fish and bring meat home to his family. Here in the city, there's nothing for him.
In the late 1960s, out of the urban red ghettos created by the government's policy, grew AIM, the American Indian Movement. Among the early leaders of this emerging liberation movement were men like Dennis Banks and Leonard Peltier.
In 1959, when Eisenhower was pushing the termination policy and it was trying to relocate all the Indians into the major cities, right? And Turtle Mountain was, I think, was number 3 on the list to be fully terminated. And we were given, the people were given an option either to be relocated or to just stay on a reservation, not receive no benefits, no whatever. And at that time, I started attending a lot of meetings with my father, who was going to a lot of meetings around the community. And I got interested in it from then on, because I heard some very emotional speeches made by women, you know, pleading and begging for some of the men to do something because their children were at home starving. And it had a very strong effect on me. I had swore at that time that, you know, as a young man, fantasizing, daydreaming, I thought, well, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to help my people.
Inspired by the civil rights movement, city Indians traveled back to the reservations to look for an identity their parents had lost. My friend, Virgil Kilstraight, and I were young men on the Pine Ridge Reservation in those days. All of a sudden, Pine Ridge became the magnet that attracted newborn Indians. Virgil and I were the descendants of Crazy Horse's traditional Lakotas, and it was exciting for us to watch our city cousins rediscover their culture. The memory of that time, of that reawakening, is still bright.
We were like the library that never got used. You know, I think that's probably what I would say, you know.
The full-bloods never really lost anything. They've always had it. It was the people who came back and who gained quite a bit. It was the same people whose parents have lost quite a bit within that.
The city movement, you know, all of a sudden it was cool to be an Indian because all the other young white kids were epitomizing Indians. You know, long hair, beads, the leather clothes, you know, whatever it is, you know. It was always this, you know, and so the Indian kid looks at this and he's trying to sit there, you know, wearing a shirt and tie and looking at it and say, hey, well, maybe there is something here, you know. So he looked back and he looked at the readings, the writings, and the books that was written about him. And he says, well, I like this, I like that, I like this. And then his interest was formed. Then he says, well, I'll ask my dad where I came from. He went back and said, oh, yeah, you have people living on the reservation back there, you know. So he comes back to the reservation and they maybe stuck him in a sweat lodge. And then they took all the doubts away from him. And now he's looking at other people and said, oh, there's old man kills enemy, there's old man catches, and there's old man this, you know, jumping bulls, two bulls, all of these. All of a sudden they are finding out they are like a people who recently discovered their face, you know. And they say, oh, wow, I'm here, you know. And then all of a sudden they said, okay, you have always had this. And I think this is what the role that the reservation had played.
Oh, good morning. My grandfather always said, good morning, and
in the old country, the young Indians met a Lakota medicine man named Henry Crow Dog. He was a living link to the past, to the old ways his family had maintained. He told the young activist that to be fully Indian, the new political movement needed a spiritual foundation, that what was most important was a spiritual connection to the land.
Everything is in place. Well, that's good. Everything is in place and everything's just the same. It's good. That's all right.
From the Holy Men, AIM members began to learn about the Black Hills and the long history of broken treaties. And they also confronted the stark reality of life on the reservation. In 1972, AIM launched a series of demonstrations with traditional leaders, which culminated in a march on the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C. The march to protest conditions on the reservation was called the Trail of Broken Treaties.
This is our land. This is our country. We're the native of this country. This right here, this federal ground is our property, yes. We want someone, one of our kind here, and doing our thing for us. Why in the hell do we have to put up with some I don't know people?
The Indians managed to capture headlines by taking over the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But when the occupation ended, television reports focused on major damage to the property. AIM had gone to Washington as a civil rights organization. Now they were seen as a threat by federal authorities, and they returned to South Dakota with a reputation as a radical political group. Back on Pine Ridge, AIM began a series of demonstrations against racism in towns bordering the reservation. Their growing activism and alliance with the traditional Lakotas put them at odds with the BIA-sponsored local government, then headed by tribal chairman Dick Wilson. It was a rekindling of the old divisions dating back to the days of Crazy Horse and Red Cloud. It was the old split between the hostiles and the hang-around-the-fort Indians.
Dick Wilson was elected in Pine Ridge, as many people had been elected before him and since him, according to the American system. But it didn't mean much to the old traditional full-bloods who lived outside of Pine Ridge, out in the districts. And to prove that it didn't mean much to them, you would have to see what their grievances are. Their grievances were that the Pine Ridge government was ignoring the outlying districts, that it would do nothing to take care of their grievances for them, that all of the money that was being taken in by the tribe from the U.S. government was being spent mostly in Pine Ridge on the mixed bloods, the oligarchy that understood the American system, and that the full bloods and the traditionalists were being ignored.
In January 1973, in a town near Pine Ridge, a young Lakota named Wesley Bad Heartbull was stabbed to death by a white man. When the authorities charged the white man with involuntary manslaughter instead of murder, AIM led the protest.
When you charge a white man premeditated murder, you charge him with second-degree manslaughter. And we ain't going for it anymore. And I know this whole damn town is an armed camp.
When the prosecutor refused to up the charge to murder, the Indians rioted. But many Indians on the reservation who benefited from government jobs resented the militant tactics. Perceiving a threat to his administration, Tribal Chairman Dick Wilson organized opposition to AIM.
I think every one of us is aware of what happened to the Bureau of Indian Affairs building in Washington back in November. At that time, a threat was made via telephone from Mr. Russell Means, to the secretary of the Oglala Sioux tribe, Toby Eaglebow, that they wanted to come into Billy Mills Hall here and hold a victory dance. We, of course, said no way. He responded in this way. He said, "Get your pigs together. We're coming in anyway, and we're going to take Billy Mills Hall, and we're going to use it. We're going to have our victory dance."
To counter the threat of the militants, the BIA provided Wilson with financial support. The tribal chairman used the government money to hire a group of Indian vigilantes. They were known as the Goon Squad.
These people that were hired were law-abiding citizens of this reservation, people that had jobs. Many of them did. They didn't want the same thing happening here that happened in Washington.
As tensions increased, Dick Wilson used the Goon Squad and BIA police to threaten any political opposition. They beat and harassed traditional tribal members.
The worst thing was the prohibition against public meetings. At the time AIM came in, the tribal government was forbidding any public meetings and used the police to break up any that tried to start. So it was just like a police state, which is really what was behind the decision to make a last stand at Wounded Knee.
A century ago, on December 29, 1890, at Wounded Knee, South Dakota, the U.S. Army, Custer's Old Regiment, shot down 300 unarmed Lakota men, women, and children. They were accused of performing an outlawed ceremony called the Ghost Dance. The bodies of Chief Bigfoot and his followers were piled into a mass grave. It was the last massacre of the Indian Wars. Wounded Knee was the darkest hour in Lakota history, and it became a potent symbol for all Indians. On the night of February 28, 1973, the American Indian movement led a band of rebels into Wounded Knee, just miles from Pine Ridge. They captured the town, sacked the general store, and barricaded themselves against the police. It was an audacious stand to gain national attention. The 300 insurgents were immediately surrounded by combat-trained federal marshals, FBI agents, and Wilson's vigilantes. The next morning, the world woke up to reports of a new Indian war. I left college and went straight to the reservation to help move supplies into Wounded Knee. We proclaimed the independent Oglala Nation, demanded an end to the corrupt system of tribal government, the removal of Dick Wilson, and the return of the Black Hills. The takeover would become a long, bitter 2.5-month siege, the largest armed conflict in the United States since the Civil War. Although they were surrounded by government forces during a harsh winter, a sense of dignity and confidence emerged within the embattled camp. Inside Wounded Knee, the dream of a free Indian society was reborn.
For 71 days, I never worried about a BIA person coming to tell me what to do, or a BIA police officer telling me what to do, or a BIA administration telling me what to sign or not sign, or what deed that could be authorized, or what resolution was passed. No white person ever came and came up to me and said anything to me about get moving, or that this land is my land and you cut your land over there. For once, white people came up and asked me, for direction. What, can I do this or can I do that? And there was a sense of freedom, of really being free, and I didn't want that to end. And I realized that when it was over, that it would be downhill.
After 71 days, the Indians surrendered when the government promised to consider their grievances. But negotiations never resulted in any progress on the issues. Instead, conditions only worsened. The FBI and federal prosecutors conducted a large-scale investigation of the American Indian movement, tying up its leaders in high-profile trials. Back on Pine Ridge, the anger and animosity provoked by Wounded Knee engulfed the tribe. With AIM tied up in the courtrooms, Dick Wilson was free to pursue a vendetta on the reservation. Any house rumored to shelter a political opponent of Wilson could become the target of a drive-by shooting. One evening in 1974, the Richards family was attacked. 5 family members were wounded.
I got hit in 2 places, and then I saw John's arm go, and then I just laid down with him, and then just that quickly it was over. The house was full of powder from the walls, and I turned and I was running into the kitchen, and my stepfather was laying, and there was just blood everywhere, and Lulu was laying half in and half out of the house, and Dokes was under the table, and it was just total confusion. There were kids laying all over. My other little sisters and my little stepsisters were laying on the ground. I didn't know who was dead, who was alive. And a neighbor pulled in and he took us to the hospital, and that car was going down the road and somebody was still firing.
We had no protection from our own police. We had no protection from the FBI. We had no protection from the U.S. Marshals or any kind of law enforcement agencies that exist. I felt like they were all working together and that we had to protect ourselves because it was the police that shot us up. There was no investigation afterwards.
Well, I guess it wasn't really law and order. It was protection. Protecting the people that were here that didn't support AIM, you know. And
Tribal member Dwayne Brewer was a leader of the Goon Squad.
That was, you know, mostly it. Like I said, we never allowed these people to come into town and raise hell. If they did, we were always gathered up. This house right here was firebombed on the corner. The houses I'm talking about that were shot up a lot are the ones that are up here.
How can you justify that kind of shooting at these guys?
You really can't. Just got away with it, you know. It was going on all the time. If they wasn't shooting around and, you know, and raising hell, then we was. You know? So it wasn't just all goons. This little crew up here raised hell quite a bit and done a lot of shooting too.
The violence engulfed all of us, and we all had to take sides. Many of us believed that the federal forces on the reservation had sided with the goons. AIM was prosecuted whenever and wherever possible, while goon violence was either condoned or overlooked. The U.S. Civil Rights Commission asked the Justice Department to investigate FBI bias, but no charges were ever brought.
I'm not aware of any alignment that we made with a vigilante group. Again, our utmost desire was to keep the peace and to prevent loss of life. And if our agents are alleged to have violated the law, then they are held, and they can be held like any citizen to account for themselves. So when you speak of harassment, of terror, there are certainly civil rights and countercharges that have been made, but I haven't seen success in those areas where they've been able to prove some of these allegations that you're now bringing up.
Did the FBI like you?
I got along good with them. Yeah, they probably thought I was a funny guy, you know. Have all these weapons and stand out as much as we did in them days, and all of the situations we was involved in, and yeah, we wasn't afraid. He probably run my name through the computer and said he's got, you know, sitting there with 4 weapons and he doesn't have a permit for any of them. But
when they came to your house and they saw all those weapons, did they give you anything besides the intelligence, that is, information about AIM? Did they give you any physical items at all?
Well, I know they, you know, one time they gave me some armor-piercing .357 Magnum ammo. Here, you know, in case, you know, they're in case they're in a brick building or something, or, you know, this just give them to me. Here. Them are expensive rounds, you know. You don't get them anymore. They only go to law enforcement people. So, yeah. But, you know, we had them. We had all that stuff.
Why would the FBI give you armor-piercing rounds?
Probably so that, you know, I had enough weapons, enough ammo to do a job.
Against AIM?
That was who was having war with, you know.
During the 3 years after Wounded Knee, 60 people were murdered on Pine Ridge in the tribal civil war. Most were supporters of AIM. A sense of helplessness and isolation terrified reservation families.
A number of Indian delegates from the Lakota Nation came down there and again pleaded for some American Indian movement help, because Indian people were being brutalized, being killed, were being beaten, were being terrorized. I think Rosalind Jumping Bull was one of them, and a number of different other elderly ladies. So I organized a couple of carloads of people to go down there with Dennis and everybody else, so we went down to, that's how we ended up in Pine Ridge at that second time.
When Peltier returned, he and a group of young AIM members established a hidden camp near the remote hamlet of Ogallala. Residents in the area had grown increasingly fearful of the Goon Squad. On the morning of June 26, 1975, 99 years after Custer was defeated, 2 FBI agents chased a car onto this property. A shootout erupted. After a day-long gun battle, the 2 FBI men were found dead. One young Indian had been killed by police gunfire. Peltier and the other Indians escaped into the hills. 200 FBI agents were flown to Pine Ridge in search of the killers. It was the largest manhunt in FBI history.
The Ogalallas don't like what happened. And if the FBI don't get them, the Ogalallas will.
What do you mean?
Just what I said. We have our own way of punishing people that way.
Shooting on the reservation?
You said it. We'll take care of them.
9 months after the shootout at Pine Ridge, Peltier was captured and returned to stand trial for the murder of the 2 FBI agents. The Indians protested that the government wanted him not for murder, but for his politics. His trial brought Peltier national attention, but the judge would not allow any evidence about the political violence on the reservation. Peltier was convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 life terms. 5 years later, Peltier's lawyers won the release of a secret FBI document which indicated that his gun did not fire the fatal shots. But his latest appeal, based on this discovery of withheld evidence, has been denied a hearing by the Supreme Court. For many Indians, Leonard Peltier had become the latest symbol of the resistance and the spirit of Crazy Horse. The year after the FBI agents were killed, Dick Wilson was defeated in tribal elections. The Goon Squad disbanded. The American Indian movement lost its prominence in the political landscape, and the violence subsided. But for the Lakota, the tribal civil war had overshadowed the vision of the return of the Black Hills. Today, the Black Hills are still occupied by the white men. Tourism and gold mining are flourishing. At the peak of the summer season, the sacred land of the Lakota is the site of the largest motorcycle rally in the world. But for more than 100 years, the Lakota people had never abandoned their claim to the Black Hills. Generations of tribal leaders continued to battle for the land in the courts. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a lower court decision that the Black Hills had been stolen from the Sioux. The ruling said A more ripe and rank case of dishonorable dealing will never be found in the history of our country. A payment of $122 million was ordered. Although the Lakota people had very little money, they refused the payment.
When the Supreme Court wrote that decision, they recognized this was not the most honorable thing that ever took place. That is, that the Indians were probably taken advantage of. But nevertheless, it's something that the United States government did, and it's history, and it's something that's got to be lived with. And we're trying to abide by the law of the land, and that is when something is taken by the government, the person from whom it is taken is entitled to just compensation. The Supreme Court says you've got to do that. You've got to pay them just compensation, and that has been arrived at. Some of the Indians are now saying, hey, we don't want the money, we want the land back. But that isn't the way it works. History has moved on down the road, and you can't go back to 1877. You can't bring the buffalo back.
Before the 1970s, many Indians might have given up and taken the money, but the militancy of that time sparked a resurgence of Lakota spirituality on the reservation. After a lifetime of teaching the old ways, the medicine man Henry Crow Dog died in 1985. He had taught a new generation of Indians that what was fundamental to Indianness was the spiritual connection to the land. In the beginning, it was the young men from the cities who listened. But after the Civil War on Pine Ridge, the mixed bloods began to find a new respect for the traditional ways. Men like Crow Dog had taught the words of Crazy Horse that one does not sell the land on which the people walk, and that to sell the Black Hills would be like selling your mother. Those teachings would now blossom into a widespread demand for the return of the Black Hills. The Lakotas were now determined to pursue the difficult course of legislative action. New Jersey Senator Bill Bradley proposed a compromise solution to give back all federal land in the Black Hills.
This is a congressional act that would cede to the Sioux Nation 1.3 million acres of land in the Black Hills area of South Dakota. Now, there's no private land involved, no state-owned land involved. All rights of access, timber rights, grazing rights, mineral rights that are existing now would continue to exist. It would create a Sioux National Park that would be available for everyone to come and visit. And I think that it would right a wrong that was done to the Sioux many years ago. And in that sense, I think that it's the kind of thing that reflects on the best traditions of America to right this kind of wrong.
The Bradley bill died in 1987, but similar proposals are pending. The legislation does not threaten any existing rights, but any offer to return land to Indians is strongly opposed by most whites in South Dakota.
I told one guy that was here, he said that this place and my ranch really is Indian land. I said, no, it isn't. I says, I got this land, some of it I bought from homesteaders, and my dad homesteaded some of it. And they homesteaded from the United States government. And the United States government bought it in the Louisiana Purchase from the French, so if you have an argument, go argue with the French. They sold it.
Listen, I don't think the Indian would have hollered if he wouldn't have had these rabble-rousers put these notions in their head, like AIM. We never had any problem with them before.
They get drunk once in a while, but like anybody does, most anybody. But they never had no problem with them. Heck, we got along with them good, and I really think we get along with them good now.
In any war, which you read your history books, you can read the Indian Wars, such and such, just it's listed in your history. And when you lose a battle or lose a war, why then you have to suffer the consequences. They're conquered people. If you conquer a people, then it's got to stand. That's just like if some big guy comes gives you a thrashing, you stay thrashed. Or if you want to try him again, why, I guess you can. But the end result might be the same. Good chance of it.
Today, the Lakota people are more unified than any time I can remember. In the old days, only the full-bloods came to the summer powwow on Pine Ridge. Even among our own people, there was a kind of racism. The full-bloods were called big bucks or big Indians, and they were thought to be stupid. But since the Civil War, things have changed. Now, the mixed bloods also come to dance. For them, I think they saw they had to make a choice, to be an Oglala and all that it entails, or go the other way and have nothing at all.
I kind of halfway believed a long time ago in some of the ways, but I never was involved in it because of my light skin. It was hard to get into any little group, the traditional group, because they were so strong. Now it's kind of opened up for all of us.
Just some of your friends that are full-bloods and stuff say, you ought to come out to my house. We have good sweats, and it doesn't have to be a religious one, it can be just for the good feeling, and a simple prayer. That, I don't know, going through them for 3 years and really getting involved in it, and then to go around all of these people that you were at war with, you learned that you can't go and, be having a ceremony trying to heal somebody or pray for them so that their future can be good and have hatred for them, They teach you in simple ways is not to carry hatred in you. That's a sickness, And so just by, going out and doing it and being around them people, I think that I got rid of a lot of my hatred and stuff, and they probably got rid of a lot of hatred for me too because, we get along.
Buried in the cemetery at Wounded Knee are the last 100 years of the history of my people. This is the mass grave of the 300 Lakotas massacred in 1890. Here too is the grave of Glenn Three Stars. He was a prominent member of the Goon Squad. He is buried next to Milo Goings, who was inside Wounded Knee in 1973. 5 generations have now passed since Crazy Horse was killed. Nobody knows where he is buried. The vision of Crazy Horse was to stop the encroachment of the white man through the medicine of the mole, who can come out of the ground anywhere, any place, any time, to fight. He may come back in 10 different people, 10 different ideas, and become very powerful, and then suddenly disappear. Now a new generation holds his vision for the return of the Black Hills. The spirit of Crazy Horse is alive and still travels on this land.
Funding for Frontline is provided by the financial support of viewers like you and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content.